Israeli Defense Forces have a ton of momentum going in their favor. They've managed to cut all of Gaza in half. They've managed to control and to siege northern Gaza. So what do you do from here? You stop? That is right. The United States, from the Department of Defense, from President Biden, is asking Israel to quote unquote pause. Stop your attack. Hold on. Israel has responded with, we're not doing a ceasefire, we're not stopping, why would we stop? Okay, so here's what's going on because the specifics of verbiage is very important, and here's what I mean by that. The United States, from the DoD, Brigadier General Ryder is saying, we're not asking for a ceasefire, we're asking for a pause. Same goes for President Biden. He doesn't think a ceasefire is tactical, he thinks a pause is better. Now, before we get into actual definitions and why a pause is not a ceasefire and why a ceasefire is not a pause, we'll get into that in a second, you have to understand the context. The United States is asking Israel to halt your attack. You need to start providing the humanitarian aid you said you were going to provide. It needs to start coming in. Whereas Israel finds themselves in a position of, we are providing humanitarian aid, but we're also in the middle of a conflict, United States, so what do you want us to do here? Okay, so let's start with the definitions game. Is a ceasefire a pause, and is a pause a ceasefire? Let's go straight to the Googles and look up the definition of a ceasefire. According to Google, a ceasefire is this: a temporary suspension of fighting, typically one during which peace talks take place, a truce. And again, Israel has responded they are not in a position to have a ceasefire because when you look at the end of this definition, where you talk and have a truce, you look for peace. And it doesn't look like Israel wants peace right now with Hamas. So now it makes sense when you look at the actual definition as to why the United States is saying, look, we're not asking for a ceasefire, we're asking for a pause. You see, there's a big difference there. It's a pause. But to the Israeli Defense Forces, there's no difference between a ceasefire and a pause. However, Israel does look like they've paused. Now, from the time of making this video, Israel has just gained control of northern Gaza. If anything, they're actually trying to make sure they do have total control, ensuring that the routes from the north to the south are totally in control with Israel, making sure that the Navy is all set in place, making sure everyone is good to go. So they are in an actual position to pause, but it looks like it's more of a tactical break is what you'd call it in the U.S. military. Now, one thing you need to understand is that the U.S. military, the United States, has a lot of influence on Israel. Not so much controlling them like a puppet. However, everything the United States has requested to Israel, Israel has actually done. So all of a sudden, Anthony Blinken is flying to Israel here very soon at the time of making this video, and he's flying to Israel to see how this humanitarian aid can get to the civilians in Gaza. You need to understand, when you put everything into context, remember that time President Biden flew all the way to Israel just to have a 7-hour meeting and flew back to the States? That meeting was this: Israel needs and has to provide humanitarian aid. If they don't, the United States and really a lot of members of NATO had said, we're not going to support you. You need to provide humanitarian aid. Now, there are some contradictions to the statement, if I'm going to be honest with you, because the DoD Pentagon has also stated, look, we're going to give munitions to Israel, and however they use those munitions, they can do whatever they want. But look, from the Biden administration and the State Department, Israel needs to provide humanitarian aid. So that is why Anthony Blinken right now is flying over to Israel to have this meeting. Now, when you start to paint the total picture, if you head over to the Israeli Defense Forces, like all of their social medias, all of a sudden they now have this like entire campaign of we support civilians, we are fighting Hamas. Like, it's all over their social media. So a lot of this is starting to line up where the United States is saying, look, you need to stop, you need to provide humanitarian aid, and Israel is also, they're saying the same thing. But as far as momentum goes, it looks like all of it has sort of stopped. Now, Israel is in the middle of a double siege. They are sieging all of Gaza, but they're also controlling what's going into Gaza to include the humanitarian aid. So a lot of humanitarian aid is actually getting into Gaza. It just so happens that all of it is being checked and all of it is being monitored to make sure they know exactly where it's going. This is to include the major route from Egypt. The United States is also heavily involved in this. But as far as that humanitarian aid making it all across Gaza to make it to northern Gaza, Israel will be checking everything and also monitoring the status of the aid. Now, it's a double siege because we're going from the outside in. Israel now is in Gaza. They are sieging northern Gaza, Gaza City, but there is a lot of outside pressure as well, not only from Israel's allies, but from the enemies of Israel. Now, due to the fact that Israel is inside of Gaza and there is a clear double siege here, there is a lot of outside pressure from the enemies of Israel. We're starting to see evidence and signs of these coalitions building up. We're starting to see military members moving from Syria into Lebanon. You're starting to see a group called the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. This unknown group who has just come up out of nowhere to form a coalition to fight Israel and the United States. So there's a lot of warning signs from the outside where Israel has to make a decision. Do they continue with this campaign, or do they just wait there as all of these armies and militaries are starting to build up all around Israel? This tactical pause, if you will, is also highly affecting the United States. You may have noticed the U.S. military has been deploying a lot of assets, missile defense assets, more troops, more F-16s, A-10s, F-22s, everything they got. Right now it's in the Middle East and starting to keep building and building and building. But again, this pause is only going to further more action beyond Israel. Again, here's what I mean by that. The more that Israel has been involved in this conflict, the United States has been heavily affected. So again, this conflict is making for the buildup of coalitions and adding to the motivation of people who want to fight Israel. Maybe they can't get to them directly, but maybe these coalitions can fight the United States and start to add pressure to other Western assets to hurt them, because if they can hurt the U.S., they're also hurting Israel. And ever since Israel has actually entered into Gaza and has started to perform their objectives, things have gotten way worse and worse beyond Israel for the United States. Now, we also have to state the obvious. What about the hostages? Israel is just being told, hey, you need to pause. But again, if there's hostages in Gaza City, do you just wait? Do you hope that Hamas has mercy on these hostages? So again, really big decisions need to be made from Israel, but it does look like that Israel really is listening to whatever the U.S. military is saying, because again, understand this. The United States is heavily embedded with the mission planning, the hostage rescue. There's been an announcement from the U.S. military and, the United States that you literally have Delta Force out there. I know they're not called that, but I'm going to call them Delta Force. You have hostage rescue specialists, which again is Delta Force. You have all of these high-end units, these elite units who are helping with the mission planning and prep. So the United States is heavily influencing Israel on what they're doing. Something else Israel needs to be very worried about, and I'm not saying they do this, I'm not saying they don't do this. The more that they wait and the more that they siege Gaza City, the more that it turns into an epic stronghold for Hamas. Hamas has total home court advantage right now. And if you go and look at the combat footage that Hamas is releasing, they love that Israel is right on top of them, because they can just pop up out of these lone wolf tunnels, just pop on up with a couple of guys, take out a tank and run away, and Israel has no idea where these guys just came from. So the more that Israel quote unquote sieges Gaza City, it looks like Hamas has no issue whatsoever of this happening. The example that keeps getting used is Mosul, Iraq, where it took 9 months to attack Mosul. Even Mosul was sieged. However, the guys who were protecting Mosul, I can't say their name on this app, they managed to hold out for 9 months. As far as Hamas is concerned, the one thing that they got going for them is they have a ton of outside support who's also causing external pressures to Israel. Oh, also, they have the usage of civilians who are not able to leave Gaza City. Now, I'm not going to be one of those guys where it's so black and white. Like, why wouldn't you just leave Gaza City and go to the south? I don't think it's that simple. I think there's a lot of fear out there of just walking out in the open and they might get taken out. A lot of the people in Gaza don't trust Israel, so Gaza City has not been able to be totally evacuated. Israel is going to somehow have to navigate the fact that not only are they going to be doing direct operations against Hamas, they're also going to have to be dealing with civilians. Now, I am not saying this is in the capacity of civilians are now turning on Israel. That could happen, but I'm not going to speculate here because there's no evidence of that. The evidence that we do have is that a lot of civilian casualties are out there, so you could only assume that some of these guys are kind of pissed off with Israel with the fact that you just took out my apartment building and all of a sudden I'm supposed to act like I'm friends with you. Again, I'm trying to bring this all together so you can see the perspective of when you tell Israel, hey, just halt, just stop, you're starting to put more lives on the line on both sides of the spectrum. Something else that you have to point out is that a lot of Gaza City has been destroyed. So this whole notion of like just sweeping on through Gaza City and going door to door, there are no doors. A lot of this is just rubble. So I don't know how Israel is going to do this. Are they just going to bulldoze their way through all these areas? Are they going to be looking for these tunnel systems? And these tunnel systems alone are going to be extremely dangerous. It's going to be highly effective against Israeli troops. They've already shown to be highly effective. And Israel, again, it's going to take a long time for them to sweep across all of Gaza City, but to also sweep all under Gaza City. Now, these are the things to look out for. How long is this pause going to last? And how willing is Israel really going to, allow for this humanitarian aid to enter Gaza City? Because look, this humanitarian aid is not only for southern Gaza, it's also for Gaza City. But this also means you're now opening up routes. People are walking straight up to the troops, taking things back, and we don't know where that stuff is going. A lot of Israel totally speculates, and Israel totally knows that a lot of this humanitarian aid goes straight to Hamas, and that is why Israel has been so reluctant to allow this to happen. Again, I'm not here to sway you either way. I'm just trying to paint the total picture. This is the scenario we are in. Israel is being told to pause, being told to really ceasefire. Israel is saying that is currently not on the table, but it does look like Israel has taken a tactical pause due to the nature of the conflict they are currently in. They have controlled all of the north. They've cut off all of the north. They are waiting to see what they should do next because this is going to be a very difficult operation. The United States says, hey, hold on. Pause. Everybody stops. Hey, let's get that humanitarian aid in. In Israel's defense, they're like, guys, we're waiting here, but the forces are getting ready. They're building up. They're bunkering down over in Gaza City. What are we doing here? So we'll see what happens. Israeli casualty counts are getting higher and higher. Casualty counts are getting high on all sides. Hopefully this conflict ends soon, but it looks like it's not going to end soon. It looks like Israel is doubling down, whether or not they ceasefire, whether or not they pause. Objective number 1, eliminate, clear out all Hamas everywhere throughout all of Gaza.